Okay, we're starting with Matthew 13, parable of the wheat and the weeds. And of course, we've been in Matthew 13 before, but it's interesting that the parable before this one is the parable of the soils. Now, it's called the parable of the sower, but it's really not the sower. That's the important thing here. It's the soil. What kind of soil am I? And now we jump into the parable of the wheat and the weeds. In other words, if I'm growing, I'm either a wheat or a weed. So we need to find out which we are this morning.
I'm not a tear.
Well, a tear is a weed,
Yes.
but it happens to be rather noxious weed. In early Israel, in this agrarian society, the comment was that a noxious weed is poisonous, and therefore you might liken it to, in our area, to, what's that weed? That
Local weed.
Local weed. It could be something similar to that, where the cattle will eat it and die from it.
Yeah.
Even though it's so pretty and it looks so tasty. It's kind of like when we were on vacation with our grandkids, the youngest 1.5-year-old, who's just a speed demon everywhere, just doing everything, wanted to climb into the pool and take his cup and start drinking the pool water. Typical kid. I said, I would have done the same thing, I'm sure, if we had a pool, but
But that's what the Antichrist is going to be. He's going to be good looking and have a lot of charisma and fool millions.
true, but now
he's a noxious weed.
he's a noxious weed. And, well, get this one. This good seed and bad seed are in the same field.
Yeah.
All right, I'm getting ahead of myself, but
No, the world
there's
is full of good and bad.
yeah, but it isn't just the world now we're talking about. He says, I'm sorry to jump ahead, but he says, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man, the field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom,
Right.
and the weeds are the people of the evil one. And in other words, there's a sense where even in churches, get this, even in churches there are good and bad people.
There are.
Oh, duh.
Really?
Some churches are bad.
Well, there are some churches that are bad too.
Yeah.
But, we don't like to think that our church is bad, or any church is bad in Sierra Vista. I mean, I know a lot of these people. They're really nice people. But are there some weeds in those churches?
Oh, I think because we're talking human beings.
Yeah, we're talking human beings.
And of course, and it may be that sometimes let's take Ivel as an example. That Ivel might be good today, but tomorrow. We all vary, we all have good and bad in us, and hopefully the good rises to the top.
Yep.
And I think and the lesson I got out of this, I don't know that I can always apply it, but the lesson I got is don't judge, because the workers couldn't tell the good from the bad.
That's true.
So who can I tell? I might think X is bad, but I really don't know.
Well, sometimes we as human beings have a tendency to label somebody because of their behavior at that particular moment.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that's who they are.
No, and it doesn't mean they're bad. It's just take it your kids.
Yeah.
Our kids are not bad kids, but their behavior at a particular moment might be bad.
Right, yeah.
Well,
And the thought I had, we may think we are good. We may think we are good. But if we're not on guard for ourselves, we may be pulled by whatever force in life to do something that is out of character.
Right.
and
It can happen.
and it does happen.
Yeah.
Because that's who we are as people, that we are all capable of doing bad things. Now, one example that I thought of in the good and bad situation was, you know, a priest. Now we can pick on other people's churches, not our own.
Okay.
But a
Right.
priest who is gotten out of line and abused children, and that's really sad. And we think all along people were trusting this guy, and
Yes.
now they
You're
can't.
right.
And so, I mean, that's probably the way out there. I mean, classic example. But we've had some in Protestant circles do the same. Jimmy Swaggart was certainly in the newspapers for the longest time about his exploits, and we're glad that he ended up in jail or kicked out of the ministry or whatever. But
Well, look at Jim Jones.
Jim Jones is another one.
I mean, that's a bizarre one.
It's a bizarre one, but he claimed to be a church, and people followed him to their death in that regard. But I had a man in our previous church in Sonoyta. His name was John. I won't give you a last name, but John got into a particular theological sect, SECT, that was way off base. And he presented himself. John, when he first came to church, was right along in step with us, but he got to a point where he was taking his out of this world teaching and nailing people in church and saying, haven't I told you about this? And he'd pull them aside and start preaching to them about what was really an aberrant belief from the Bible. I mean, he would point to text, but it was way out of context. And finally, I met with him and I said, John, I can't keep you in our church. I mean, that was the hardest thing to say, but I said, you're spreading poison in the midst of our group. Now, he thought it was fully true, but it was about 3 cards short of a deck there. And another one I can think of was the fellow in our India Rural Evangelical Fellowship. That was a mission that we helped start from our church in Chicago. And when we first got there, we made it very clear that the money sent there, I told you this before, but the money sent there had to go specifically for the children of the orphanage. And one of the first guys that was there as part of the board said, well, that's not what other missions do. Other missions allow the board members to keep some of the money. And we said, that's not going to happen with this mission. He says, well, my home needs some work and I need a new car. Sorry, baby, but you're not going to get it through this. And he got up and walked out. So there, we were able to separate the wheat from the tares almost immediately. He separated himself.
Right. That's an easy kind
That
of.
does make it easy,
It
doesn't it?
does make it easy, but it goes to show that here's a guy that, you know, you could say, well, he's an upstanding guy. He happened to be the brother of the orphanage director. But it was hard for the orphanage director to say goodbye to his brother in the board, but he understood what boundaries we were putting on this, and this. One of the things we read in our research before we went on the mission was that 90 to 95% of the monies that go to India missions and orphanages don't get to the kids.
That's awful.
Isn't that awful? See, but there's no way to regulate it over there. There's no oversight. There's nobody standing there right on the sideline saying, this is the way we play this game.
It brings to mind, there's an organization which, for a period of 6 years, I was in charge of. I was officially president, Friends of Auschwitz Worldwide. And we shipped pallets of supplies. They were donated supplies. We didn't buy them. And they were new. Anyway, they would arrive in a country, and the local group was unable to get these supplies until they paid a fee, even though it had been agreed ahead of time. And finally, I think it was Egypt, we got Rotary involved. And Rotary International was able to finally get it out. But sometimes, and India was a prime example, it would never get out. I mean, and what they would do, they would intercept it, okay, and they would sell it on the
Yep.
black market. There was a doctor in Egypt who had an ileostomy, okay? His patients, some were in England, and they would bring him supplies.
Wow.
I mean, you know, we have been very fortunate in this country with what we have, the freedoms we have.
Yeah.
But I'm confident that, and I shouldn't use those words, but even at our ports of entry into this country, we probably have some employees that may be suspect of
Oh,
taking, I mean, example of drugs on the border here.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. So we want to examine this parable then in light of the wheat and the tares. So we've determined that they're in the same field, and we also determined that they'll be judged at the end. The wheat and the tares will be separated by the angels, it says. It's interesting, Matthew 13's context is a lot to do with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders. They were all listening to this. And at one point, this parable is given, and the crowds heard it. But the explanation is given to whom?
Disciples.
To the disciples. Because even they were a bit confused. And so Jesus spells it out for them. You will be held accountable. There is a day of accounting. There is a harvest, as it were. And so the religious leaders didn't get it then, and even after Christ rose from the dead, they still didn't get it, and they faced, as we're going to see in Acts, more persecution from the religious leaders. So he explains it beginning in verse 36. So he answers in verse 37, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The good seed. Now, how can you tell good seed?
I can't, but God can.
Yeah, that's true. But even in our own hearts, how do I know I'm good seed? That's the real question.
Well, another way of looking at this is we have thoughts as
Yes.
individuals. And some of our thoughts are good. And some of our thoughts are bad.
Not yours, though.
I'm guilty. I've had bad thoughts.
Okay. We're all guilty, aren't we?
And you know, and that is, we have these bad thoughts, and are we going to yield to the temptation that those thoughts may be pulling us this way or that way? And we have to work very hard to push those bad thoughts out of our consciousness and just retain the good thoughts. And I've been working 80-some years on this, and I have some.
You haven't perfected it in 80 years?
No,
Bummer.
but
I got a long way to go.
Quite a bit of time to go, yes and no.
So don't worry about
but I will admit, and this is a witness or whatever, the times when I have been in quandaries, if I can focus on nothing but good, life is easier.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the only way I can say it. I mean, I'm sure more sophisticated ways of saying it, but
Well, no, I don't think you can get too sophisticated about it, because the reality is we all have evil within us that can jump out and create a real problem. Someone look up Matthew 12:50. In fact, look up the whole little context there.
I have 12. What do you mean by the whole context?
Somebody came up to Jesus and said, your mother and sisters are here.
And he replied to him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Oh, you see, bisexual right there. Because the disciples were all men, but he called them mother. Keep that in mind, Jerry. Okay.
Yes, dear.
Yeah. For whoever does the will of our Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.
What's the key word there?
Will.
What?
Does the will of my Father.
The will of my Father.
Father in heaven.
I think that that's so critical. As Jesus, this comes right before these parables begin. And I thought, how interesting that seeking the will of God is the key thing to being good seed. In other words, knowing the will of God, doing the will of God is critical.
Can I ask a question? Because I can read this a little differently.
All right?
In mine it says, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. And if you read it wrong, you're kind of anticipating that this is when you're in heaven. You're doing what he wants you to do, but yet in this case it really means that he is in heaven and you're following him.
But
Well,
Right.
he's not in heaven yet, though.
No, God is. If you're
Yeah.
talking about Father in heaven.
But
So
Right.
in a sense, if this was written, I guess maybe it's just part of me, because
The-
I'm doing all this stuff that in heaven kind of in a sense is
Well,
separated.
I
from-
think to me, where some of our problems come in is, okay, a situation. I pray about, God, help me know the right thing to say
Yeah.
and do. And I'll trust is the same prayer. God, help me. And lo and behold, we say and do different things, but we both think we're doing the will of God. You
Well-
know? How does that happen?
I sort of have a different take on it, because Jesus died for my sins, period. The sins are forgiven, I am righteous before God. So if I sin, I'm very repentant, but I don't think God loves me less
Oh, no.
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 at all.
No.
So I don't ever see myself as good or bad. I see myself as God pointing out when I'm jealous or envious or whatever emotion, anxiety, depression, fear, all of those things that do not show that I have a strong faith. And God sort of easily points that out to me and where to go to get reinforcement, the word.
And that's quite true. None of us are perfect, we'll never will be on this side of heaven. And so knowing that our Heavenly Father loves us, but I think what we're trying to decide here is what is good seed, and good seed seeks to do the will of God.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that you guys missed the point. God may speak to you differently. Now, I know my wife is always right, and she'll remind me of that.
I mean, life is easier that way.
That's true. She
I
says,
wish you acted like you're talking,
It's
fella.
like she's not the weed, she's not the weed, she's the rose.
she's a rose, that's right. But what I'm trying to say is that good seed is important, and one of the things that the Pharisees and Sadducees, the religious leaders of that day, as you read through this, that really had only one thing in mind, and that was building up their own little earthly kingdom, their own little, rabbinic, whatever you want to call it, themselves, power, ego, yeah, all of that. And so Jesus is really railing against them, but in the same token, today's church can also be guilty. Now, getting back to, let's move on to verse 38 once more. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. And we just talked about the good seed. And then it says the weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. And so we know that the devil has got his finger in the pie. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. There's hope written right there. I don't know, I didn't see it before, but there's hope. hope is that the angels don't come till the end time, till the harvest, or until each one of us face our own maker. But the hope is people can change. We have a chance to be redeemed even before we die, even though we've been bad a long time. I think the best example I can think of is Son of Sam, the great, what do you call him, mass murderer? No.
Serial killer.
Serial. It's easier for you to say. Serial killer
Serials.
in New York. And when he got to Sing Sing, he met the chaplain there. The chaplain led him to the Lord, and Son of Sam became a model inmate. And not only that, he was the chaplain's assistant. And of course, his fame preceded him, or his infamy preceded him. And many guys who were in there for lesser charges were taken by Son of Sam's faith. And so he himself became an evangelist, as it were, in prison. So before he died, he was a son of evil. Before he died, he became a son of God. So to me, that speaks volumes to what God had in mind. He didn't want anybody to be saved, and even if they go to jail or prison, there's a hope for them. Now, let's move on to one other section, and that is the very end. The weeds be pulled up and burned in the fire, and so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out the kingdom, out of his kingdom, everything that causes sin and all who do evil. There's two things there. What does your Bible say, everything that causes sin? Is there another word there?
Mine says the man who sent out his angels, and they will gather out his kingdom all things that offend.
All things that offend,
Practice
okay,
lawlessness.
that's a good word.
And then lawlessness. That
All right.
practice lawlessness.
Offend, what is
Which verse?
30, verse
41.
41.
The Son of Man will send his angels, weed out the thistles from his kingdom, pitch them in the trash, and be done with them.
Thistle.
They are going to complain to high heaven, but nobody is going to listen. At the same time, ripe holy lives will mature and adorn the kingdom of their Father.
Okay, so he shifts those phrases around there. Ripe, holy people, yeah. Well, the text that I've been looking at here causes sin, offense, or stumbling block is another thing, another word that's used there. I'd like us to look at stumbling blocks for a minute. Romans 14:13 and 1 John 2:10 and 11.
Oh, I got Romans
All right, Romans.
14:13, and I may bleed into 14.
That's fine.
Forget about deciding what's right for each other. Here's what you need to be concerned about, that you don't get in the way of someone else, making life more difficult than it is already. I'm convinced, Jesus convinced me that everything as it is in itself is holy. We, of course, by the way we treat it or talk about it, can contaminate it.
What
Okay.
verse was that?
That's 13 and 14.
And
Interesting.
what he's saying there is, don't be a stumbling block to other people by the way you act. And I preached on that section a couple months ago. But the attitude we should have is to be tolerant of one another, love one another, and try not to be a stumbling block to one another. So the whole idea of wearing a mask and not wearing a mask can be a stumbling block, and has been a stumbling block for people. And so we have to be considerate of others. Like when I go into Pat's office, it says right on the door, wear your mask. And so I wear my mask. I dutifully do that. But I don't wear a mask when I'm in my office by myself, or I don't wear a mask when I'm riding in the car or in my own home. So you have to be tolerant and considerate of one another. Otherwise, we can be a stumbling block. Now,
Well, there's a section because somebody doesn't wanna eat meat.
That's the same section, yeah.
Okay, you shouldn't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Because that's what they believe.
Yeah. And I remember distinctly when that hit me was, one of the fellows that was in our Bible study, had been an alcoholic. And, some of the guys wanted to go have a beer, and I said, we can't do it for Jim's sake.
Right.
Because that would just put Jim in the wrong position. And I said, not that drinking's wrong, but it's wrong for Jim, and it's wrong for us to encourage him. So, that's where you have to draw a line and say, no, I'm not gonna put a stumbling block in front of my brother. I shouldn't get any more stories. All right, 1 John 2, 10 and 11.
1 John 2, 10 and 11. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. But he who hates his brother is in darkness, and walks in darkness, and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eye.
So there's two kinds of people there, right? One who does right by his brother, and the other one who causes a stumbling block, or is the stumbling block.
Right.
So he says, I'm going to get rid of everything that causes sin, offends, everything that's a stumbling block. Now, one of the stumbling blocks, and I'm running out of time here, but one of the great stumbling blocks for Christians is a little thing called pride.
Big thing.
Yes, we all have pride, don't we? Well, I've got 4 more verses to look up, so I'll give you each one. Ivo, would you look up Psalm 101, verse 5? And Lang, look up Proverbs 18:2. Jerry, look up Proverbs 18:12. And Candy, look up Romans 12:16.
12:16.
Yeah. And I hope I got those verses right today.
Mine did. Yes.
I hope you do too.
And
But I hope,
Okay, start with Ivo here.
I hope that I've got this right, because according to Peterson, it's one big paragraph.
Oh, okay. That's right. Read the whole paragraph.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but
Okay.
I refuse to take a second look at corrupting people and degrading things. I reject made in Canaan gods. Stay clear of contamination. The crooked in heart keep their distance. I refuse to shake hands with those who plan evil. Am I in the ballpark?
Yeah.
I put a gag on the gossip who badmouths his neighbor. I can't stand arrogance, but I have my eye on salt of the earth people. They're the ones I want working with me. Men and women on the straight and narrow. These are the ones I want at my side. But no one who traffics in lies gets a job with me. I have no patience with liars. I've rounded up all the wicked like cattle and herded them right out of the country. I purge God's city of all who make a business of evil.
Okay, so there's a lot of combination of ideas there, but the middle of that, verse 5 says, I will not tolerate people who slander their neighbors, and I will not endure conceit and pride. Ooh, okay. Now,
Okay, Proverbs 18:2, a fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinion.
yeah,
Ooh,
another,
we have a lot of those in the country.
what does that sound?
another,
That one was Proverbs 8, the Psalm was 101,
Yeah, but
Proverbs 18:2.
That's good.
Yeah.
another translation puts it this way, says, fools have no interest in understanding, they only want to air their own opinion. I don't need to understand. I know, I got it all. All right, Jerry, Proverbs 18:12.
Before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility.
What is he? He's haughty.
Haughty.
And haughty is another word for
Proud.
pride. I'm proud. Just, you know, and it just doesn't honor God. And what does
Egotistical is the word.
Romans 12:16 say?
12:16 says, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion."
Same kind of thing as Proverbs.
Mhm.
So pride is a great issue in anyone's life and in any Christian's life too. So I guess if there's anything I can draw further from this is that yes, there will be a time at the end, but before then, if he's going to come and, as it says here, destroy everything that causes sin, like pride or stumbling blocks, offenses, we need to start working on that now and try not to be offending one another. So the question now is repeated: am I a wheat or a weed? And probably or a little bit of both, huh? Sometimes we act like weeds when we really need to be the wheat that he called us to be. Okay,
Well, it kind of symbolizes that when he said they're both growing together. You
They're
can't
both
hold
growing
one out
together.
without the other one going.
right. And some people are so, you know, he talks about the end, the accountability, and some people are so far off the beaten path at the end, that's where they're going to be. You probably met people like that, way too proud to even turn to the Lord, and so they die without even admitting. They may have gone to church 3 or 4 times.
I mean, some people never are humbled.
Yeah.
I use that in past tense. I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but I mean, I think of occurrences where people have difficulty being humble toward others or with others. And I recall growing up, I was taught that if you have a bad habit, okay, and if parents try to, if they observe a child that's got a bad habit in their opinion, they will try to change that early in life, because if it continues, then it's going to be harder and harder for that individual.
Yeah.
And
And
it's,
that's what you call good Christian parenting, to help people deal with those issues. And hopefully we can do the same to you know, brothers and sisters in the Lord, help them along the way. We all want to grow together and do the right things. Now let's look at the parable of the rich fool from Luke 12:13 to 21. And I'm just going to give the context again, is talking about end times, talking about a judgment, talking about what will happen when we die. It's interesting we came across 2 of these together. No, it's not interesting. I picked them that way, but
we came across it.
okay. So it begins with, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Jesus is trying to not skirt the issue. He says, your focus is in the wrong direction. Then he said to them, "Watch out," he said to the crowd, "watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." So it's like Jesus saw through the guy's request and said, "I know, buddy, what your problem is. It's not dividing the inheritance, it's your own greed." And so the first thing we see here, greed, is the great kicker in this parable, if I can say it that way. I mean,
Thou shalt not covet.
yeah, thou shalt not covet. And so guard against greed. There's a lot of verses on greed, and so I'm going to give you each one. You'll love this one, Ivel. Job 31,
Job 31?
Job 31, 24 and 25. That'll probably be a whole paragraph for Peterson. Ephesians 5:5, Colossians 3:5, Jerry, and 1 Peter 5:2, Candy. And so what we're looking at here is greed, and what does greed mean? That's what we want to define.
Go any place that somebody has died and watch the relatives. I have experienced it all my life, and it appalls me every time I see it.
Even just go to a yard sale and see people bickering about the price or snatching up something before somebody else can get it, or but you're right about the heirs after, you know, and people say, oh no, that'll never happen in our family. Wrong.
Yeah. Okay, what does Job say?
Okay, 21, 31?
31:24.
Oh, 31, 24. I'll get there momentarily. 31, 24.
24, 25.
31, 24. Okay. If only someone would give me a hearing is the title of it.
All right.
Did I set my heart on making big money or worship at the bank? Did I boast about my wealth, show off because I was well off? Was I ever so awed by the sun's brilliance and moved by the moon's beauty? Then I let myself become seduced by them and worshiped them on the sly. If so, I would deserve the worst punishment, for I would be betraying God himself.
Okay, and so you can see he steps through a lot of things there. He begins by saying, do I serve the bank? Do I worship at the bank? And that's greed. That's what we're getting at there.
Yep.
Okay? Ephesians 5:5.
For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such as a man is an idler, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Whoa, mama.
Yeah. He says, that text really says greed is a form of idolatry. So, wow. Watch out. Jerry, what does Colossians 3:5 say? Or, yeah.
Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth, fornication, uncleanliness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry.
All right, there again. He
The
repeats
word is
himself
brought out.
in Ephesians and in Colossians, similar. 1 Peter 5:2.
Shepherd the flock of God, which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly.
Okay. Dishonest gain, again, is a form of greed. And so we've probably heard stories about ministers who walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars because they think they deserve it. And you wonder, what are they in this for? The finances or for serving? Because serving is kind of a contra thing to greed. In other words, if I'm here to serve, then greed shouldn't be involved in it. My brother served on the call committee for his church up in Boulder, Colorado. And they found one guy who was looking for a job, a position change. He was in Texas and wanted to move to Colorado. And they found out that he wanted, get this, $150,000 for his salary. My brother says, $150,000?
How big
My
a
brother's
church?
a frugal Freddy. Don't miss that. But he felt that guy's just way out of the league. In other words, he felt maybe $80,000 was appropriate to $100,000, and Boulder's expensive. Okay, but he thought flat out 150. He says, no way. Even though the guy had really built up his church in Dallas, and evidently he thought he was worth that, it wasn't going to cut it in Boulder. Now, I don't know the guy, so I can just say I think that's being a bit greedy, so I'm not going to go any further than that. But greed is one of those things Jesus says to guard against. Now, it goes into the story from here, and he says, now there was a certain man, a rich man, whose field yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will did you get the emphasis there? I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and then I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for years to come. Take your life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Do you see any emphasis on the pronouns there? It's all what? I, me, and my. Yeah.
And, I mean, and as why my mind went to where it did when you were reading that, I don't know. But a location you're very familiar with, Oak Park, Illinois.
Yeah.
I mean, she's still alive, but she's now has very severe Alzheimer's, but they lived there, had their house there, and they were talking about neighbors that they would sell their house, and then the person who bought that wanted a neighboring house, okay? So they would pay a large amount of money for this other house. They would tear them both down and build this big mansion. I mean, my mind being a poor dirt farmer from Kentucky just couldn't, it was hard.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but there are people.
Oh,
and I find myself, I was judging, and maybe that's wrong. I know that is wrong for me to judge. The person may have been doing the right thing for them. I don't know.
Yeah. But there's a sense of greed that you see there, a sense of opulence. And so what Jesus is trying to help us see is, well, first of all, he doesn't condemn a person who has wealth. He condemns the person who has greed, which is more than that. Someone asked, a very rich man back in the 1920s, they asked him, how much is enough money? And he says, just a little bit more. And the guy was one of the wealthiest men in the world.
Yeah, they never
Just
have enough.
never have enough. Oh, by the way, I should also insert here that the worst givers by percentages are rich people.
Yeah.
The best givers are the lower middle class.
I have to bring up, I used to live in Dayton, Ohio, and there was two interstate highways, and there were probably, well, there were lots of churches, but the major churches, there was probably 4. And for some reason, they got into this building frenzy who could outbuild the other church. And so all of a sudden, all these huge churches, they sold the old buildings and built these, spent millions on these churches. And all I could think of was, they could feed an awful lot of people.
And you know the sad thing going on beyond that, because as we travel around the country every year and we visit these churches and we visit these mega churches that have been built and now have 25 people attending, 30
Wow.
people, and what can you do? You know, they can't sell these mega churches. They can't hardly maintain these mega churches.
Well, it was just,
Well, and
it was
just-
just a competition.
Yeah.
Just recently, in the last few years, a large, very mega church, Lutheran church in North Glendale, could not pay their bills, and so they combined.
This is
now-
Arizona or in?
Yeah, Arizona. And they sold their building to another megachurch that couldn't pay their bills. So really they were combining efforts. And so that's a good thing in one sense, but you were right. They got to the point where they couldn't pay their bills, and so now the bills were, shall we say, they were divided, and it was easier for them to handle that. And that church had grown enough to do it at the time, but had gradually gone back. We're running out of time, but I want us to then, well, first of all, we need to understand that the guy who said, let's take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? The condemnation is for greed, and then also for saying, well, if you think you've got it all handled, where do you think this is going to go?
Nobody's throwing it in the casket after you.
That's right. Well, they try. I mean, one guy wanted to be buried in his own Cadillac, and they had to dig a big enough hole for the Cadillac. But like somebody said, I've never seen a U-Haul trailer behind a hearse.
No.
So,
Well,
but
you know, some people, I feel, have the idea that Ivel and I are spendthrifts, let's say that, because of our lifestyle. It's not the cheapest way we could live, okay? And so we've been concerned, and we've said to our children, you know, this affects what you get because of what we're spending today. And their attitude has been, the first thing they ask us is, are you leaving us any debts that we have to pay? No, don't think so. Then it's okay. Spend what you have. Don't worry about what you're leaving us, as long as it's not debts. Then it's a different issue, and your lifestyle stops right now.
I think the legacy that we leave is a critical question here, and that's one of the things that I think many of our financial advisors will say, what are you doing to prepare when you die? Where will this go? Get it all down in order now. It's really, really sad when those accounts aren't taken care of, and so people end up going to probate, all the money has gone to the government, and so, or it's not divided to the point where people can actually get their hands on it, and the only people who get rich off it are lawyers. And that's sad. So being prepared better than this guy was is important. But I want to get to one last thing. Jesus said...
Could I say one last warning?
Okay.
Because we've put a family on the prayer list, and they are going through where, and the warning is for everybody, follow up with what you said, plan, but tell your family where the information is, because the mother had a stroke, she took care of everything, the father knows where nothing is, the kids did not know how to access money or what to do. Plan, but more importantly, in addition, tell your family.
Yes.
I mean, they were trying to figure out, for example, the dad's medication, how much to give him what day, little things. Tell your kids, tell your neighbor, whatever.
Super, I like that.
Tell people.
Somebody needs to know.
Yeah.
So the last question Jesus asked, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves and is not rich towards God. Now, I think we all want to be rich towards God, so let's look up 4 more verses to wrap this up. Start with you, Ivel. I always give you those easy ones. No, I'm going to give you this one. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. 1 Timothy 6. Then Candy, Matthew 9, 23. Matthew 19, 23, I'm sorry. And Jerry, Proverbs 30, 7 and 8. And Lang, Psalm 145, 15 to 18. And these will all help us define what being rich toward God really means. And by the way, let me throw this in. This parable does not condemn people who are wealthy. And what it does, it condemns greed. And we're going to see in these contexts, a person that's rich toward God isn't condemned, it's what we do with our riches, okay? Ivan, what does 1 Timothy 6:17-19 say?
1 Timothy 6, okay. Tell those rich in this world's wealth to quit being so full of themselves and so obsessed with money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Tell them to go after God, who piles on all the riches we could ever manage, to do good, to be rich in helping others, to be extravagantly generous. If they do that, they'll build a treasury that will last, gaining life that is truly life.
So what should we do with the finances we do have?
Be generous
Be
with them.
generous, share, take
Share.
care of others.
Take care of others, don't look after your own. So it's not the wealth that's condemned, it's what we do with it. Lang.
Okay. Psalm 145, 15-18. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food at the proper time. You open your hand and satisfy the desires of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and loving toward all he has made. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth.
So again, we're looking at, with our lives, looking to the Lord day by day, that he provide for us. And we dare not get ahead of that. Jerry?
Do things I request of you. Deprive me not before I die. Remove falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me.
So he says, give me neither poverty nor riches, lest what?
What proverb was
Proverbs 30, 7 and 8.
that? Okay, thanks.
What would he say? If you give me too much, Lord, what would I do?
I have to read the next paragraph.
Okay.
Lest I be full and deny you, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal, and profane the name of my God.
So if you have too much, you might do what?
Do so.
What?
Ignore the Lord, is
Ignore
what
the
it's
Lord.
saying.
Yeah, be full and deny him.
Be full and deny him. How many rich people do we know that are full of themselves and denying the Lord? Or,
Sure.
lest I be poor and steal. So, again,
You don't want to be poor, you don't want to be rich, you want
well,
somewhere in the middle.
but if you are rich, we go back to what we read from 1 Timothy, be generous with that, give, and share it, all right? One more. Matthew 19:23.
Right. Then Jesus said to his disciples, assuredly, I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
And the disciples said, what? And Jesus' response was, well, it is hard because we begin to trust in our riches rather than trust in the Lord. And one of the ways you can deal with that is to give away as much as you can. John Wesley used to teach his people, save all you can, earn all you can, and give all you can.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a gentleman we had at our church in Sierra Vista from years ago, very wealthy man, and in his will, he set aside money for the church and for missions to the tune of $1.5 million. Now the guy was worth that and more. He did leave some finances for his heirs, but the bulk of what went to the church and to missions, which is just amazing. I mean, the guy had planned ahead and he knew what he was doing. Reminds me also of a guy named Laterno. Laterno became a very rich man because he made this large, heavy equipment that the army used in its reconstruction in Europe and Asia. And because he was a Christian, he said, I'm going to give more and more and more. And eventually, he sold the company, but by the end of his life, while he was worth millions, he gave 90% of his income away. 90%, I'm thinking, man. But All right, so he's worth $1 million and he gives away 900,000, he could live on 100,000. You say to yourself, but that rarely happens. Most people want to do it the other way. I'll live on 900,000 and give away 100,000.
What's the fellow, he lives in like Nebraska?
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett, who's leaving nothing to his family,
Where's he leaving it though?
to charities and
Charities,
different
yeah.
things, because my kids should be able to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And so, and he's what, one of the richest men
Men in the world, yeah. Well, so we learned from the parable of the rich fool that we need to plan ahead. We need to be givers of all the good gifts God has given us. And I don't care if it's a little bit or a lot. We need to be good givers, putting His kingdom first in our lives.
And the thing too, Chuck, sometimes we go back to what we've talked before. When we talk about giving, it's not just money people
Yep.
give. It's the time and what you have, even if you have no financial
Yep.
things to give. Everybody has something to give.
Yep.
Be
Time,
good
talents.
stewards of our
Yeah.
talents,
Yeah.
be it money or abilities.
Yeah, I call it time, talents, and treasure, the 3 T's.
One of the most important lessons God has taught me is when you give without expecting anything back.
Amen.
If you give it freely, it's not to be paid back, it's just, you can go throw it in the trash. It's just give it and let it go from there. Whatever they do with that is their business.
Yeah, and you know, we try to be good stewards of what we give. And so there are places online you can go to find out which charities spend their money correctly. And so I always look for charities that I don't know a lot about. I want to know if they give, how much do they set aside for raising money that I'm giving? And if you can hit the 90%, in other words, if they're 90% or higher in giving it to where it belongs and not to administration, that's really a good charity. But there are some, like the Red Cross, that really it doesn't get as far because so much goes for administration.
I have known some rich people and I have some rich relatives. I wouldn't ask anything from them because you will owe.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You will owe them.
You will owe them. And that's where we, you know, we want to be, you know, careful, but I think on this side, we have to say to ourselves, like you just said, I'm not going to give, trying to tell people how to spend their money. I mean, if you decide that's what the Lord wants you to do, you give it, but you don't moan and groan and beat the, you know, drums about, well, why did you do this and why did you do that? I mean, there are people within let's just use our own church, people within our own church who, we have a trustee, we have a budget, that's where the money goes. I'm glad we can see where it goes. But there are some churches where that doesn't happen. I've always believed in open books, that people need to see where their money is going and that we want to be good stewards of it. But there are other problems that can be created when you don't do that.
And there are within a church, people who give, even an open thing, that's fine, I give my money. Oh, but wait, I don't want you to get blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's not right. It's like you say, Candy, you give, I give to the church, trusting it will be used wisely, whether it's my priorities or not. I give.
You don't give and then argue about how you're using it.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like that fisherman, he throws a hook out there in the water, right? He's giving that hook to the fish, and then he pulls it in.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I cannot believe you sometimes.
Well, anyway, we learn from the parable of the rich fool to plan ahead and not say me, but give it and generously be generous giver.
Aye, aye.
Let's, yes.
No, Captain.
Aye, Captain. All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you again for reminding us from your holy word what you expect of us, that we want to be rich towards you, Lord. Teach us how to do that with all the things you've given us, our time, talents, and treasure, Lord. Help us to be rich towards you all the days of our life. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
We won't be here next week.